Well, first of all, I read Rosie O'Donnell's autobiography in 7th grade. Rosie. And I carried it with me all throughout the halls. And she said that if you have a net, you will fall. And I never forgot that. I was like, well, Rosie says, if you have a net, you will fall. So I'm not going to have a net. And because, your parents, when you grow up and say, I want to be an actor, they're always like, well, have a backup plan, And I was like, Rosie didn't say that. And I was a really big Rosie fan. So I definitely took that to heart. And I don't know. I'm delusional. Like, I think you have to be some level of delusional to rationalize, making that career choice. It has to be something that you just have to do.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Kohn from IndieWire. I'd like to welcome up Aubrey Plaza and Theo Rossi.
Hello. Hello.
Well, welcome. There's so much to discuss with this movie, just in terms of, what it's saying, what the, where the performances came from. But I think, first off, Aubrey, not just as a star, but as a producer here, you're sort of supporting the project. So can you talk a bit about kind of what your way into it was with a first-time filmmaker, and sort of what appealed to you about the opportunity therein?
Yes. Well, the first time I read the script, I was really impressed by it. I loved it. It was a really fast read. It feels like the movie. It has this momentum where it just kind of barrels forward. And I just saw great potential. My brain started buzzing, and it just doesn't happen that often that I read something where I'm like, oh my God, I can see this whole movie. And yeah, so as a producer, my first thought was, well, who's gonna direct this movie? We need to find someone really great. And then I met with John Patton-Ford, the writer, and I was like, we should find someone like really amazing to direct this movie. And he was like, well, I'd like to direct it. And I was like, no. Because you haven't done it before. But then we kept talking, and then and then obviously it's ideal to have the director have the writer direct the movie, because those are, it's their story and everything, that John said. And to me, it was clear that we wanted to make the same film, and we had the same priorities and vision, sensibilities and stuff like that. So that was my approach, I guess, in the beginning, was just to kind of, see if we were on the same page, and then just dive off the deep end together.
So Theo, at what point did you see this script, and what did you make of the opportunity there?
So yeah, I was doing a movie in Atlanta, and I got a call, and they sent it, and again I read it, like ripped right through it, which is always a good sign, right? Where you don't stop, you're kind of like reading it while you're, even if you have to do something else. And I read it right away, and then I'm just a giant fan of writer directors. When I see that, like right away, that's moved up the line for me. And then we had a Zoom meeting, and it was really.
And I wasn't. Yeah, I forgot. Forgot to go on the first one. I'm so sorry. And you keep throwing this in my face, but I was shooting too.
Yeah, and I was John
distracted.
was up at like 3 a.m. It was dark where he was. We were all in different time zones, so she didn't show up, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then
that's not my style, by the way.
No, it wasn't. It was a total.
I was shooting nights, and I was out of my mind.
And then when we got on our next one, after waiting a little while, Aubrey came on, and I knew right away. She said one line, and I knew that I wanted to do the movie. She got on the Zoom, and the first thing she said was, "Don't look at me." And I thought, that's not the way it works, because we're on a Zoom and we all see each other. And I just absolutely loved her energy. John and I had now spent a lot of time prior on the 2 meetings talking, and he just had a very clear vision. And I knew, and what I've come to even find out more and more, and just through her work, is I like artists that take chances all the time. that nothing's ever the same, that nothing's whatever. So that drew me immediately. And I just thought, I love independent films. I love short film. I love films that, like, what I mean by that is like short schedule, 20-day, like you got to link arms, you got to make the film, and it's do or die. You're on the plank. I love that. And I knew this was one of those.
Yeah, Aubrey, obviously you're known for doing a lot of comedic work, and this performance is not that, at least in the traditional sense. So what sort of challenges did that represent for you, at least in terms of figuring out how to play Emily without, trying to make what she's going through into something that could be a punchline?
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't feel like I've done a comedy in a while, but I guess I did one last year, but it hasn't come out yet and it wasn't funny to me. But I guess my thing is I don't really approach them any different. To me, if it's a comedy or a drama, I have the same process that I go through, and the audience can decide if it's funny or not. I don't. Yeah, I mean, I think. What was the question?
Well, talk a bit about finding the dramatic core of this character. I mean, getting inside her headspace.
Yeah, I mean, this role was really appealing to me because it felt very physical, which was different than things that I've done before. It felt like an opportunity to physicalize in a different way and sound different and move different and things like that. As far as getting into her head, yeah, I mean, it was just really about kind of, tapping into the, how I relate to her and not judging her actions, because what she's doing is kind of questionable. And so it was really about trying to find the truth and, create a whole person, a flawed person that is trying to survive and kind of go back to those days, of grinding it out and trying to remember what that feels like and trying to kind of, summon all of those things and try to do something truthful.
And in your case, Theo, I'm curious about how you sort of accessed this character, because there's a lot of layers to him. He seems pretty tough at first, but as we get to know him more, we see more of the sort of sensitive and fragile aspects of him.
Yeah, I just always think it's always bizarre when actors talk about acting, but it's like, I mean, I guess we're in the right company in a way. It's like, I look at it from the outside in, right? So my first thought was like, okay, what does he look like, right? How is he? What is his sensibilities? What kind of music does he listen to? Where did he go to university or not? When did he come here? So I go that way, and then that starts to build into kind of how I see him. And some of the things that were the big tips were like his mom, his love for his mom, and his big, his dreams outside of this thing that he was thrust into, right? And I thought, my whole outlook on art and on life is that you go somewhere. You're not who you were yesterday. You're not who you were before. So when I read this, I was like, that Yusuf is not Yusuf at the end of page 102 or whatever it was, right? It was like, look at that journey. Look who he's become. And if we can pull this off, if I can pull it off, if we can pull it off, I can get there. And that's going to take you as an audience member on a journey. And then while this is happening, there's a whole nother one happening with Emily, which is whether it be the opposite or kind of different, right? And I just thought, wow, if we can do this, how cool is this that you're just kind of tricked by maybe who they were in a way. So I just love that, I just liked him immediately. And I try to like all my characters, but sometimes it's really hard because I play some awful people.
Right. Well, and in this particular case, you also have a really interesting chemistry that develops between these two characters, in the sense that it starts from a place of obviously lack of trust, maybe fear, and then it evolves to all these other places over the course of the movie. So can you both talk a bit about figuring out how to develop that chemistry in a convincing sort of way?
Yes. Well, I'll say first that what was very unique about this movie for me, and I think for you as well, was that we had 2 or 3 days of 3 days of rehearsals, which doesn't sound like a lot, but for an independent film, it's a lot. Nobody does that anymore. Nobody. wants to rehearse. So that was cool. And once, and I'm down to rehearse, and I'm down to not whatever you want to do is fine with me. But I love to rehearse. I don't see the problem. I don't see whatever. But once I realized that he wanted to do it, and when we got there and we met, and we rehearsed with John a little bit, it was just clear to me that we had the same love for acting and the process. And because you'd be surprised how many actors you work with that it's like someone put a gun to their head to do it, and you're like, don't you want to be here? Like what? But so we had the same spirit, I think, in terms of that, and there was a playfulness there. And yeah, I mean, you're just you know, you're the best. So I don't know.
Thanks.
But that's how it started, rehearsals. But and also the film was challenging. It's like we shot it in 21 days, 20 days in Los Angeles. That's a ridiculously low number for the amount of scenes that we shot. And so we were up again every day. We were up against all kinds of challenges, and I think that's a bonding experience. And
100%.
we had to link arms and get through it together, and so that helps too. It kind of infuses onto the screen when you get along and you're really in it together. So
Yeah, in the largest sense of the word, you find out under duress who people really are, right? They say like it's a weird thing with like fame. If excuse my language, if you're like an asshole, you become a giant asshole, and if you're a good person, you become like a pretty amazing person, because it just accentuates who you are. And it's also in the same in duress, like in independent films, you're up against it, and we were up against all of it, and it had this moment from the beginning, from rehearsal, where it's like, it's me and you, it's me, you and John, like, let's do it. Like, we're going to do this because it doesn't benefit any of us not to do it great, or to do it to the best of our ability. And like Aubrey said, it is an odd thing, right, in acting, because, they say, there's an old thing that says, you want to see an actor miserable, give them a job. They're miserable when they don't have one. They're miserable when they do. It's like, they're just always miserable, right? And it's this weird thing. But we just had this same spirit of like what we wanted. And I know, I've produced films, and I just know how hard it is. And I wanted to do the best for her. So I would have done anything. And then I think in the characters, when we were approaching the characters, it's like I spent a lot of time with animals. It's like when you put two new dogs together, right? They're just kind of like on the outside. They might kind of like bark at each other, and then like they paw, and then they slowly get closer. And that's kind of the way I was looking at Yusuf and Emily. They were like, it was slow, and it was like a paw, and then it was like a look, and then it was, a sniff, and then it was like, next thing you know, they're like showing each other their dreams and hopes. And I just love that part of that. So it was like that was happening kind of in real life while it was happening in the character. We were all just kind of coalescing.
And the emotions in very small periods of time in this movie, you can go from like one extreme to another extreme. And I wanted to ask a bit about that too. One of the most startling sequences in the movie is when you get pinned to the floor, and then a few minutes later, you get sort of a totally different headspace. You get sort of your revenge. Can you talk a bit about what it was like to perform under those constraints?
Yeah, I love that scene in the script. When I was reading it the first time, that was definitely a moment where I was like, oh my God, I was not expecting that, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do the movie. But yeah, we were shooting nights at that point, and we shot that entire sequence in one night, and it was really challenging and scary because Craig Stark, who is the actor that played the guy that pinned me to the ground that robbed me, is an incredible actor. He's really good, and I just I realized, like, on the first take, even maybe in the blocking rehearsal, like when he came up the stairs and I saw the look in his eye, I was like, okay, I'm scared. Like, I'm scared already. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to feel this. And it sucked. Like, it was brutal. And then we shot it in order. So it was, I think, yeah, we shot it in order. And so it was hard also to do that, to be kind of pummeled over and over again, and then have to, like, kind of, but it all, for better or for worse, it helps the work, because it feels real after a certain point. You just, I mean, for me anyways, I just kind of like surrender, and I'm, and then it takes me a couple of days to like shake it off. But like, yeah, it was pretty rough that night.
And Theo, you have a lot of scenes where it's like you transition from maybe a little confident to being less confident. I think that sequence towards the end where you realize you've been robbed before you can rob someone else is really striking in that respect. Can you talk a little bit about what it was like to sort of perform that realization?
Yeah, I think that what I love about acting, and I've always thought the best acting I've ever seen is when no one speaks. Like, it's just in their eyes. Like, you could watch someone's entire life change, like, just by looking in their eyes if something happens. And with him, I think that he was putting on a front for a lot of it. And then as he starts to slowly feel more comfortable, you start to see like him completely unravel in a way. And he's not used to that. And he's definitely not used to that around someone that he's known maybe 2 weeks. But when that's all happening, he's hanging on for dear life. Like, what do I do here? He's starting to see all the things he thought, the apartment, the getting stuff for his mom, all this is going out the window, and potentially her with it, because he's starting to think like he needs to do all this. And now I have a plan. I'm going to do this to Khalil. Well, that didn't work. Now what? And then she has to literally step in and say, we're going to do this. And I think he was at the end. I think he would have given up. And I think when you're playing something like that, you just have to give into it. We've all been there, but you have to like give in to what's going on. And you have to just obviously the words are the most important thing. And it's your dance partner. If you don't have the right person there, you just can't do it. It's like you can be the greatest actor in the world, but if you're doing a two-hander, you got two people in the scene. You need that other thing to work. You need that other person to work. And what I was saying earlier, and I'll say it again, because there's very few people in the very long time that I've been doing this, every take is different. Everything is a surprise. And that keeps you alive. That keeps your eyes alive. It keeps you alive because that's real life. And it's just such a rarity. So I think when you were watching that descent and you were watching that change, it was all because of where we were on that day. I remember it very clearly, walking in there every day into that warehouse of what our pre was and what we were doing. And it was just the main backbone of it was our ultimate care for each other in the scene.
And what about that final confrontation at the house? I mean, there's a lot of physical action there. I don't know how many stunt doubles were involved or whatever, but just, how intense was it for you just physically to do all of that?
Yeah, it was intense. We had stunt doubles, but we did a lot, we also kind of got in there and did a lot of it ourselves too. But we definitely would have, we'd have a stunt coordinator block things out, but it was a really small operation. And we're shooting on location in these kind of cramped spaces, and we're shooting at a really ridiculous pace. So we didn't have a lot of time. So it was really just, and we kind of made it up. I mean, we made it up, like, because it's not really in the script, like physically kind of how it all goes down. So we kind of all had to like, band together and like figure out the sequence of how this happens. And I think I don't know, like I felt like there was a real focus on logic. Like and I feel like you were really good at that too, because I'm not saying you've ever robbed a house before or anything like that, but
I have.
you knew what you were doing. So there was a lot of like, Theo being like, no, you wouldn't, walk in like that. You walk, and I was like, okay, or whatever, what I'm talking about. But
no, I know exactly what you're saying.
But like stuff like that. So it was just paying attention to how it tracks. Like, but yeah, the physical stuff was yeah, it's exhausting. I don't know. He got thrown to the ground. I just kind of like stabbed someone.
No, mine was
Okay.
no. Well, you were actually getting the.
Oh yeah, I was being choked. I was being
You were
choked.
being
Yeah,
choked,
I
and
remember
then
that.
you had the carpet blade, and
Right.
that was more. You were doing way more physical stuff. I think that in that what I kept saying, I remember that night because it was like 4 a.m. We were on like a Friday or something, and it was like, it has to be believable. Like, he's not in the shower. Okay, well, we have to, like, I kept saying, like, the second we walk past shower, I'm going to notice he's not in it. Now what? Right? And then it's like, oh, the bathtub's there. Like, let him get hit and hit his head and, like, make it believable that he's out. Like, he's really out. And then he goes to attack. And, like, right away, it's all very dirty, like, the way it's happening. And that's, I think, what's a credit to the film is that She's not a superhero. He's not a superhero. Like Khalil's not a super. Like it's not. It's just very dirty and real, which means that the audience member who's watching it can picture what would they do if they were there. How would they handle it if they had the taser? What would they do if they got Khalil to the ground? And I think that that's why we respond to films that we like, is we're in there for a moment. So I just think the physicality of it had to be believable.
Sort of a cliche to ask actors about the research they do for parts, but in this particular case, within a few minutes of watching the movie, you start thinking, is this a real thing? Is this the way it works? And I wonder, for the two of you, how much you learned about scams of this nature and the kind of underworld of sorts that exists around them.
Well, John did a lot. John has like personal stories about this kind of stuff, and he did a lot of research about it. It is a real scam, the dummy chopper thing. I didn't really do any research on it at all, but in our rehearsals, in our 3-day rehearsals, the prop master brought one of the embossing machines, and we did have to learn how to actually use it and make fake credit cards and stuff. So that was fun.
You have that skill now.
Yeah. And so that was cool, but yeah, I didn't know anything about it. I mean, yeah. So I just kind of went along for the ride, but John definitely did his research. But
what about you? Did you know anything about any of this stuff?
Allegedly. Allegedly. I might have seen some crimes when I was young. And it's, like I always say, crime is an interesting thing. It's not nearly as hard as everybody thinks. And allegedly, from what I've done in research. But with credit cards and all that, especially back in the day, pre-cameras, pre-everything and all that, I mean, it was really easy to make. I've heard it's really easy to make, fake credit cards and, go to ATMs and go use them in supermarkets and potentially Radio Shacks if they're still around. And you used to, and they used to. And so it was a little easier. The dummy shopper thing was, I knew, but it would be more like if someone was making them, they'd sell them to other people and stuff like that. What I liked about it was my research was more of like what on a ground level it was, right? This isn't tons of money. The car is even still not nearly as much as it sounds. It's a lot of money, but it's not like millions of dollars, right? And like even my own wife recently, she had, a couple of charges, which we've all had, that you're like, where did these come from? And then you got to shut down your card. It's always like $40, $1, because you think they're doing those to 100,000 people, right? And it's like, that's how it kind of happens. It's always in small doses. So I had known, I'd been well-versed through family members, through my own experiences in crime. And the one thing that I've always been so intrigued with the way it's perceived on screen and the way it is sometimes it's not nearly as sophisticated. And I think that that's what was so great about this. Like it seems like it is, but it's not that sophisticated. She's taken an embosser. She learned once. She's making these cards, and then she's going into, Hollywood version of Best Buy and getting big screen televisions. Very possible, especially with the people who work there don't care, so it's like, these are all very possible things. So my research was just more in like the street level of it, not going from the high level of it. And that's what I kind of was really intriguing to me.
And I think this raises some interesting questions about where Emily winds up by the end of the movie. I mean, there are a few different possibilities that you might expect things to wind up at when you're watching this thing, and she gets away or she gets busted. And instead we wind up in a situation that's not quite either of those things. And your character finds a different kind of calling. I mean, what do you make of sort of that end point? And what tone do you feel like the movie is trying to strike there?
Yeah, endings are always hard for me. I like that, we ended the movie like it ends in the script, and I think it's a beginning. It's an ending, beginning, ending. And I like those where it feels kind of, it's not like everything's wrapped up neatly in a bow, but you're kind of seeing like someone on the verge of like their next chapter or something. I think that's cool. Tonally, I don't know. It's interesting. I would say tonally for me, I mean, this is like all John, this is really a question for John. I feel like more than us, but I would say, I I would say there's something kind of not fun, but like there's almost like a genre-esque kind of tone or something to the ending where it does kind of like to have there's an interesting tone. I don't know how to articulate what that is, but I think there's some kind of commentary on just the state of America, for one. I mean, it's like she ends up in Mexico. It's like the American dream, it's like she ends up in Mexico and that's where she's free. It's like, but it doesn't feel in the same way as like the movies where it's like, I'm a criminal and I'm running to Mexico. There's a different version of that's happening where it's, so I think there's a lot of like kind of underlying commentary happening, but tonally, I don't know. It's interesting. I feel like it's hopeful, but I also feel like it's kind of tragic because you're like, well, she's gonna keep doing it. Oh, good luck. Like, I don't know. It's complicated.
It's that contradictory feeling that makes it worthwhile.
It's open for discussion. It's like it's supposed to kind of make you, I don't know, feel all kinds of things or something. It's not so obvious, I guess.
What was that group that you were working with at the end? Did you go to Mexico to shoot those scenes?
Yeah, we went to Mexico. We went to Puerto Vallarta and we shot one day there, the last day of the shoot. Yeah.
Actually, you could make a case that this is a pretty good movie to show somebody when you're arguing that the government should cancel student debt. I mean, it's a cautionary tale in that respect.
For sure.
But I'm also curious about your take on it. I mean, what do you think about the way?
I think the student debt conversation is something that's extremely nuanced, right? I mean, I didn't pay off my student debts until I got Sons of Anarchy. That was like way after, like, and I don't think if I didn't get that show, I don't know if I would, because my buddy who's my roommate, his $20,000 loan is now $79,000. It's like, so I had this weird thing where I try to always look at everything from both sides, where it's like, yeah, should they cancel student debt? Sure. That sounds great. But then again, it's like, I don't know if people would have gone to school if they didn't have the ability to get the loan, right? So it's like, there's that. Might solve for this, and you could tell everyone, because I think it's a great idea. Whatever you've paid, you look at it. So if in my buddy's case, he's definitely paid more than 20 grand. So if he's paid more than 20 grand, it's forgiven plus 15%. They get to keep 15% over what it's paid for already. And then they have to wipe the rest off. So that would be the solve to get out of this, because I think you're right. There should be a cautionary tale that we show to the system, because when people's backs are against the wall, it's like you can't get ahead. And I think that is the whole point of this, is what are you capable of when you're in this situation that is insurmountable? And I think that's what I always took away from the film, and I took away from the script, is who could we become?
You definitely need a screening at the White House, sounds like.
Let's go.
Q&A with Biden. Well, since we're talking to a room full of actors, I'd be curious to hear a bit more about kind of how you deal with the struggle early on. I mean, the movie does tap into that to a large degree. You have a character who is essentially a creative person, but also has these profound financial needs that they need to deal with. So looking back on kind of the early days, as it were, I mean, how did you sort of get through that sort of rationalization process when, it's paycheck to paycheck?
You mean like to rationalizing to be an actor, to be an artist? Well, first of all, I read Rosie O'Donnell's autobiography in 7th grade. Rosie. And I carried it with me all throughout the halls. And she said that if you have a net, you will fall. And I never forgot that. I was like, well, Rosie says, if you have a net, you will fall. So I'm not going to have a net. And because, your parents, when you grow up and say, I want to be an actor, they're always like, well, have a backup plan, And I was like, Rosie didn't say that. And I was a really big Rosie fan. So I definitely took that to heart. And I don't know. I'm delusional. Like, I think you have to be some level of delusional to rationalize, making that career choice. It has to be something that you just have to do, because it's so hard, and it's so hard when you're starting out and when you're rejected so many times and you are just paycheck by paycheck. So you just have to have that just irrational kind of drive and hunger for it, and you just have to believe it will happen. Otherwise, I don't know how you do it. That's how I was, and I did all kinds of things. I did The Secret, when that was popular. I remember doing that on the subway, visualizations. I did lots of things to get myself through it, but mostly just delusional behavior.
Yep. I think Rosie aside, which I think Rosie gave great advice, but no, I
and she's my friend now. Okay. Sorry.
Full circle.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Full circle. Full circle.
I mean, I don't know her that well, but like, I could literally be like,
You could quote the book.
things happen. I mean, I dreamt that.
So The Secret brought you the book to life.
Yes.
Fascinating.
Yes.
I think that there is something to be said about no plan B. And what I mean by that is that anyone that I came up with who was doing something else, while it seemed extremely rational what they were doing, whether they were working in pharmaceuticals or they were doing something where they were managing something, they're doing whatever, I was the complete opposite. I was like, okay, I was working in restaurants, I was working in bars, I was hustling in any way I knew that I could to free as many hours as possible for this. So it was like, okay, if I have to work a double on Saturday and I have to work, on Sunday and it was always, how can I have the most available time, even if something wasn't going on, because I could spend that time watching old movies. I could follow John Cassell's whole career. I could watch every single beat of Citizen Kane. I could do things in that off time that even though I wasn't auditioning or I wasn't doing whatever, there is no plan B. This is it. If I don't do this, I'm not doing anything. And while that's extremely fearful, that's life. You have to do that, because if, like we said with the net, if there is that other thing, you will lean into it. You will, because we all go through these swings of our mood and our feelings of like, you'll fall into it and go, oh man, she just told me it's really hard and this is really hard, and thank God I have this and I have health insurance, and thank God I have health insurance. And it's like, that's the position you put yourself in. And now times are different, both good and bad. When I lived in New York City and I first started, I'd walk around for hours putting my headshot in like these neon blue envelopes, thinking that was going to get them seen faster, and drop them off at every single casting director all day, every day. And I just did that and never got a call. Stand online for industrials for like hours. I don't even know if they do those anymore, where they take a Polaroid of you, and you just were always putting yourself out there. And I think that, I did 3 extra jobs to get my SAG card. It's like, I wanted it so bad, and but I was reasonable. I think you have to be reasonable, and you have to listen, and you have to study from the beginning, from Max Sennett and Charlie Chaplin and all the things that happen with the studio systems and the Warner Brothers and Daryl Zanuck, and you got to see the history, because it repeats itself all the time. You have to see the history of it. It doesn't change much. The good thing is now is you can literally make your own movies with your phone. You can make stuff with your friends. You're around all these creatives. And what I found is when you're around similar creatives, like we said, we're simpatico on so many levels, is things just happen. Hey, you should do this, or hey, you should read this, or hey, and then it leads to other things. So you have all these amazing creative people around you. Use that to your advantage. Don't hide. Lean in. Because you all want the same thing, and the only thing that's holding you back is your egos. So you have to just go into that. And that's always been something that I've gotten better at now, because I was really bad at that for a while.
Well, so flash forward a couple of years, and this is the last question for both of you. When you're known for something and you start getting opportunities as a result of that, how do you sort of navigate that kind of approach? I mean, both of you are doing things in this film that we haven't seen you do before. So how do you deal with somebody saying, oh, I saw you in Sons of Anarchy, I think you'd be really good at this, or I saw Parks and Rec, or whatever it is, you'd be really good at this. How do you deal with that kind of a approach, basically saying, if you can do this thing, you can do this other thing that's sort of similar to it?
You mean
Typecast.
Oh, okay. How do you deal with being typecast, is what
Yeah.
you're saying? Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's like a weird thing, because I don't mind being typecast in a way, because I feel like I was so lucky to be on Parks and Recreation, and that was like one of my first really big jobs, and I'm so heavily associated with that character. And I think there were years when I was on that show where I was like only getting offered those kinds of parts, and that's what happens. That's just what happens. You do something, people respond to it, and they want to see you do it again and again and again. And I think it's just you just have to be really proactive in changing that narrative for yourself, because I remember like the first movie when Parks and Rec ended, literally the first thing I went and auditioned for, like literally like left the Parks and Rec lot and went to the casting office, was for Dirty Grandpa, which is like which is like a De Niro comedy. And the part that they wanted me to audition for was the other part, which was probably more in line with who I should have been. But I was like, no, I want to audition for the blonde-haired, big-breasted, promiscuous person that wants to have sex with an old man, or whatever the description was. But that it was like definitely like on the page, it was like, no, that's not, you would never. And I was like, so, and I got that part because I just said, okay, I'm gonna do my own twist on this, or whatever. And I was just but I think it fueled me, the typecasting, almost like it gave me motivation to almost like prove myself. And I think for a while it felt like I did feel kind of like, oh man, I'm being like put in a box or something, and I don't like it. So I'm gonna fight to get out of that and to show people like, what I can do or something. But then I started to look at it as a gift, because if I convince people so well that I was that one thing, and then I do something that's totally different, then it will be that much more satisfying to surprise them or something. So I started to try to think about it like that and be a little bit more positive and less bitter about it. I don't know. But you just have to do it yourself. You have to create, you have to do it yourself, because people they'll just keep putting you in the box. That's what they do.
And they have to. I mean, to touch on that, it's like they have to put you in a box. They don't really know how to think outside of those lines. It's like, well, you're this, right? And it's like, no, I'm way more than that. I'm an artist. I can do anything. I can play anything. But they have to, because it makes them feel comfortable. When I say they, it's kind of like the whole representation of the system. It's like, because they don't want to think that much, which is odd in an artist sense, but it's show business. It really should be called business show, because it's really a business and the show's kind of second, right? And I think that if you look at it as, I spent before 2008, I did 50 guest stars and recurrings that I was the guy on the other side of the table. You did it. No, I didn't do it. You did it. All right, I did it. And it's like, you're that guy. And you go, okay, cool. I'm getting paid. As Paul Newman would say, you got to put food on the table. You got to do what you got to do. And then you slowly see your chances. This chance, he can be a little more sympathetic here. And this chance, he can do this. And you just start showing people, because the way is to show them. You can't tell. You can yell from the rooftops. Nobody cares. You got to show them. And I think you can show them in certain characters, because what's a bad guy? In my case, I was always playing bad guys. A bad guy is what you think of them. I never saw my guys as bad. Nobody who's bad thinks they're bad. Nobody who's an asshole thinks they're an asshole. They're just an asshole, right? They just don't think so. And I've always seen it like, I got to look at it through my perspective, and then I can gain a little by making them sympathetic, by making them, and then that slowly goes into something else, and then you become this well-rounded, it's the weird term, right? Character actor. Every actor is a character, shouldn't they all be? You're playing characters, right? That's ridiculous. So it's just like you're just always trying to win. You're always trying to convince people, and I think you're going to do that till you leave this game. I don't think there's really any winners in that. Not to be all pessimistic. You're going to always trying to expand and expand.
Well, I would love to spend another hour and get granular on the student debt question, but we're out of time. So thank you, everyone, for sticking around.
Thank
you
you
guys. Thank you so much.